All right, being 7 o'clock, we'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing because following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, January 25th at 7 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I would like to request everyone put their cell phones on silent or vibrate and any other electronic devices as to not to be an interruption to the meeting, and I thank you for your indulgence. And we'll move on to roll call, and I ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Arstead. Here. Beestrom. Here. Bizotto.
Here.
Boots.
Here.
Book.
Here.
Butke.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Seiler.
Here.
Conway.
Here.
Dickinson.
Here.
Drabeck.
Here.
Pfeifrick.
Here.
Fisher.
Here.
Gaber.
Here.
Gibbs.
Here.
Gonering. Guild.
Here.
Gums.
Here.
Harris. Jacobson.
Harris here.
Thank you. Jacobson. Johnson.
Here.
Prowse. Lamont.
Here.
Longenhan.
Here.
Leahy.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Mask. McEwen.
Here.
Oberbeck.
Here.
Opal.
Here.
Robinson. Rosenberg.
Here.
Soybert.
Here.
Van Cray. Vole. Zhang.
Here.
Gonering.
Here.
Mask. Supervisor Mask, I can see you on the screen. I'll mark you present. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have, including the viewing audience. And we will move on to item B, educational presentation and/or reports. We have a ARPA process and application form presentation by Supervisor and Chair of the HR Finance Committee, Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you. On behalf of the HR Finance Property Committee, it's my pleasure to present to you an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act project request and process overview. The committee's been working on this plan for several months. What do we know? We know that Marathon County will receive $26.3+ million in 2 tranches from the U.S. Department of Revenue. We've received the first one last year, and the second one will be coming in the second quarter of this year. These are one-time funds from the federal government to deal with the pandemic and associated impacts to communities. There's an equal amount that has been distributed to local units of government throughout Marathon County to help them in their response. We know that the funds need to be encumbered or pledged by December 31st of 2024. So we've got a 3-year window in which to allocate those funds, and they must be spent with final accounting by December 31st of 2026. The federal U.S. Department of Treasury was operating on an interim final rule until, basically that rule will be in effect until April 1st. And they have promulgated the final rule governing how expenditures can be spent. And there are a number of limitations and prohibitions in there, as well as with the final rule, a great deal more flexibility to local units of government. And we'll talk about some of those later. But in addition to what the federal government says, we're still bound by state statute in what we can and what we cannot do. Again, counties are creatures of the state, and we are authorized to do certain things and spend money on certain projects, and if they're not authorized or permitted, we can't do that. So again, the final rule will take effect in April of this year. It provides that flexibility. Some of that flexibility deals with the issue of revenue replacement or lost revenue. In the interim rule, there was a formula under which they calculated lost revenue, and if your revenues grew by less than 4.1% over the previous year, you were allowed to take the difference. Hypothetically, if you had a $100 million budget, and you had a $3 million growth, you could take $1.1 million in lost revenue and spend that without as many of the requirements on it. There's still certain prohibitions. That was changed in the final rule to increase that percent to 5.2%, which to the county I think means $1.4 million in the first year, and for a total of $8.1 million. Of that 26 we can spend with greater flexibility than we would without that, and we'll have additional years in which to calculate that number. But they set a $10 million cap or minimum, so most of the units in Marathon County are free to spend that money with a great deal of flexibility. We have reached out to them, encouraged them not to spend it all on roads, but to maybe think about how it should be spent over the next couple of years. And Chair Gibbs and I and Administrator Leonard were at the Eastern Towns last week, and we'll be at the Western Towns this week to talk about considering putting some of the money aside for broadband. But how can we spend the money? Well, the rule provides guidance or creates certain categories. One is public health. How do we respond to the pandemic from a public health perspective, behavioral health, mental health, and on other areas? How do we address negative impacts, whether it's to businesses, small businesses, nonprofits, and others? How do we provide services to disproportionately impacted populations within qualified census tracts and others? It allows for the spending of the money on premium pay or incentives or payments to public employees that work through the pandemic. In others, it allows investments in infrastructure, and in particular, singled out water sewer projects and broadband. The final rule also, one of the good things that's come out of this is the federal government seems to be moving to a minimum standard of 100 for broadband service as a expected minimum to future-proof broadband versus 25.3, which they were looking in the past. So if you've got service below that 100, you can make investments in that infrastructure. And then revenue replacement, which we talked about, that 5.2%. If your net revenues didn't increase by that 5.2, you can capture that and use that. And then the final category is no more than 5% can be spent on administrative cost. So what have we done as a committee? If you recall, last summer and fall, we went out to the public. We asked them how did they think that we should spend the money in light of the pandemic? How were they impacted, and where would the money go? We received a number of suggestions. Probably the number one suggestion was invest in broadband, but there were child care concerns, the provision of child care used for economic development projects, address some of the backlog in public safety, and in a number of others. We've shared that with you in the past, and that helped drive us. But we worked on an application process so that everyone can go forward. So in addition to, we already had approved the approximately $500,000 for improvements to the courthouse to take advantage of a lower cost point for courthouse and courtroom improvements. But we've got 3 before us today that have not gone through the process, although one was run through on a pilot basis. But we're looking for parties, internal and external. The form will apply to whether it's the Village of Marathon City, which has a project that they'd like to have us consider, or whether it's the CPZ with the Fenwood Creek project. We'd ask them to submit a funding interest form, and the county administrator will review the submissions and work with the appropriate department heads to evaluate the ideas and fill in any blanks so that we've got a complete picture of what that project might mean. The administrator will then review it for completeness and forward it on to the Human Resources and Finance Property Committee. That committee will then review them and will allow the parties to have a 10-minute presentation to the committee and forward it on to the county board. Once it goes to the county board, because we are dealing with budget transfers, we'll need a 2/3 vote. So it's a super majority, 2/3 vote required to expend those funds. So there's additional safeguards in it. So when that application comes in, we want to look at it. Is it pandemic related? Does it fit within the categories that the federal government allowed, or is it going to? Or will we looking at that lost revenue? We'll look at the economic benefits to the taxpayers and to the county. How will it help us address that? The issues that arose out of it. Does it add positions? Does it increase revenue to the county? Things like, are there savings associated with to various departments? How does it align with our comprehensive and our strategic plans, which is something that we've been trying to incorporate in all of our decision makings? Are there opportunities for partnerships? Again, the discussion relative to if we invest in broadband, will some of the local units of government that benefit through that project also have skin in the game? And how will it benefit those citizens and businesses and nonprofits in the county that were affected by the county? There's requirements that the investments be proportionate to the groups that are affected. They're looking for projects that address the economic impact, not necessarily economic development. We can't spend that on new jails, on correctional facilities, on congregate housing, stadiums and other things. And I listened to NACO has done a very good job of providing an overview of those. And I would encourage, if you want more detail on any of these categories, that you go to the National Association of Counties website and look at their presentations on what we can and we can't spend money on. But they're very illustrative and informative. So we're looking for, again, how will those projects benefit the county and the taxpayers or citizens. We've developed an application timeline. When we first started out, we talked about, should we create buckets? One of those buckets, should we take $8.75 million a year and say we're going to spend that in this year? Or should we put $5 million in public health, $5 million in economic impacts? We decided against that. We decided to see what came in and try to make sure that we don't spend all the money up front, but also not set rigid guidelines, and we're going to monitor the activity that's coming in. But we would ask that they submit the applications for consideration. We're going to do 2 rounds each year. Originally, we had talked about 3 rounds, but due to workload, due to administration, we decided to go back to 2 rounds, and we'll evaluate it based upon need and demand. But the applications will be due in April. It will then go to administration for review. HR Finance Committee will consider it and will bring it to the county board June or July of this year, and then a similar process will happen in October around budget time, with the county board voting on that in approximately December. So where are we in terms of next steps? Well, again, we have 3 requests before us tonight. We had one that we approved already relative to the courthouse. But if you have a project idea or others, we encourage them to submit that idea on the request form by April 1st. Those forms will be online later this week. Sarah Dowdat is working to get all that information uploaded. All applications will be considered. They may not all be approved, but and all projects, if we haven't funded them to date, we're considering we've wiped the slate clean. We're asking that all projects submit an application. So I'm looking at Supervisor Lonenhan. We would ask that CPZ resubmit the Fenwood Creek proposal using the form so that we have a comparative basis on which we can evaluate those, as well as the Village of Marathon City and in other departments, et cetera. So we're looking for, we're continuing to receive information relative to how the rules will be implemented and what the exact criteria are. We know that if we misspend and we spend beyond the lost revenue area, there's the ability of the U.S. Department of Treasury to come in and recapture those funds. So we want to be careful that we're looking at eligible expenses or that we're categorizing it appropriately. We will try to maximize the lost revenue category because that gives us the most flexibility. But again, we will make sure that we're tracking what category is it going into, does it meet the requirements? We can't spend it on debt, we can't spend it on lawsuits, we can't spend it on a number of other areas, and we'll advance it. But that's the process that we have, and Chair Gibbs, I think you've got a few other things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I would, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The several things I think NACO has literally led, the discussions and has done a great job as providing answers to specific questions from various counties. They have a resource on the NACO website that's dedicated to ARPA. They have their presentations have all been recorded as far as clarification on certain categories. So if a category such as the lost revenue category, they go into great depth of detail of how you calculate that lost revenue, or do you use what is now being deemed the standard deduction or the standard amount of exemption for lost revenue, that being the $10 million or less. So if a unit of government has received $10 million or less, it is the default classification says that that unit of government can utilize all of their ARPA funds under what was considered lost revenue, and that then allows them to do anything that they legally could do with those funds other than the prescribed forbiddance, and that is debt service, paying off pension liabilities, and a few others. Again, so I encourage anybody to go on to the NACO website. If they're interested, those presentations have all been recorded as far as the various categories. They also have a list of projects that several counties have taken on with some of the uses of the ARPA funds. So in some cases, people have garnered ideas from what other counties have done. Again, there's 3,069 counties in the United States, and roughly 2,100 of those counties now fall under that special exemption that says, they receive less than $10 million, so all of their funds are utilized under lost revenue. Other than that, like I said, I would encourage everyone to look to NACO as a resource. But I think one of the things that we don't know is we don't know what kind of projects are going to come in. We don't know what kind of projects, but we encourage everyone to submit their applications, and we will review. But again, they still must meet the criteria that the Treasury has set out in their final rules.
And to be illustrative, in the application process, there are expenditure categories that give a little bit more detail to each of those: public health, economic impacts, disadvantaged communities, et cetera, to give you an idea of what's eligible. So
So I guess we would open it up to questions from the board. Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have a couple items tonight that are looking for ARPA money. Have they filled out the requests the way it was just mentioned to Supervisor Longenhahn that his requests had to be submitted?
No, the PTO, the paid time off, did submit it. The others were in the process before we finalized the criteria.
So there will be no requirement for them if we approve this tonight. There's not going to be.
I think we're bringing this for educational purposes, but those were in, I think, a month and a half ago. We didn't run those through the process.
And just one more question, then who's submitting these applications?
The projects
Is it the
tonight,
departments that are doing this? Is it outside entities?
It could be the department, it could be the individual that's leading for example, if it were the Village of Marathon, I suspect that potentially the administrator from the Village of Marathon would be submitting that request and project. That would be reviewed through the process that was just described.
again, we're not meaning to be exclusionary, so it can come from a committee, an individual, or a community.
Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going through this list here. I was looking up the definition of encumbered. What does that mean by December 31st, 2024 in this situation, please?
So our understanding, and we're still looking for final clarification of what that is, we need both the definition of what is encumbered and what is spent. Encumbered would be we sign a contract or we have an agreement in place by that period of time. For instance, let's take broadband. Hypothetically, if we were to reach an agreement with an internet service provider or someone else that was eligible, and we entered into a contract, we would say that we would commit to provide $1 million between now and in 2026 for fiber to the premise. We would have to have that contract signed by December 31st of 2024, and the final accounting and payments for that funding would have to occur before December 31st of 2026. So it lets you, it gives you some flexibility relative to when the activity occurs, but you have to have it under contract or an agreement in place by 2024, the end of 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions by board members? Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair. Could you give some ideas or examples of what might be considered? I had in mind like maybe childcare for Marathon County, but I don't even know if something like that would be possible. Could you give us some ideas on what projects might be possible?
Well, I think if you look at the criteria, particularly in the impacted areas, household assistance, food programs, rent, mortgage, and utility aid, cash transfers, internet access programs, eviction prevention. We have had internal discussions on whether or not child care could be provided or some of those costs could be covered. We think they can be. Again, it's got to be proportionate to the pandemic and the impact, and the concern that the county has is we don't want to create ongoing liability beyond 2026 that we would have to bear with levy because of the levy limit. So we're trying to be careful not to commit future county boards to pay for programs that with one-time funding.
Just one addition I would reiterate is that, when the Finance Committee had a discussion about this, is we did not want to utilize ARPA funds to supplant potentially other funding sources and other funding options. So an example of that is under the new infrastructure bill, there's going to be a significant amount of dollars coming into the state, additional dollars that was not originally planned for infrastructure improvements throughout the state. And so one of the things that we talked about is not duplicating those efforts. So if we have the ability to draw down additional funds for road improvements, we don't want to use ARPA funds to supplant road improvement dollars if we have those options. So I just, one of the key things that we discussed in finance was that we don't want to supplant other options if there's other options available. Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two comments. The first one being that, and it might even be a follow-up to what Supervisor Dickinson's question was, in regards to outside entities being able to use this form to make a request of funds. Now, you had said, Supervisor Robinson, that businesses could make a request, well, small businesses, and the Treasury has a very strict definition of what qualifies as a small business. It probably would be worthwhile to reflect that on this form as far as which businesses can submit the form. In addition to nonprofits, only 501c3s and 501c19s can submit or can do ARPA projects, I should say.
The definition for small business under this act is 500.
Yeah, but just to have that reflected on here, or at least on the web page where outside entities might be making requests, would be a good idea. The other question I had was on lost revenue. So under the calculation, from what I heard earlier in your summary, you're saying that the county, using the Treasury's formula with the 5.2%, would only be projected to lose $8 million at the end of the 4 years?
For 1 year. That's
Yeah,
for
first
1
year.
year.
1 year.
Would be 8.3 million.
8.3 million for 1 year.
So we should definitely lose enough revenue to eclipse that entire allocation at the end of the 4 years.
Potentially, absolutely.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Is that going to be reflected to the departments when they submit their applications as well? Because given that lost revenue is the most flexible category, I think it's going to be a very popular category. And having a lot of departments request those funds for a lot of these projects might create a bottleneck. Thank you.
I think we want to be careful, though, not to encourage departments not to collect revenue, because we still have post-ARPA, the reality of post-ARPA. And if we don't collect revenue during that ARPA period, it's going to be difficult all of a sudden to flip that switch back on. So I think we're looking at what happened with the county, what happened at North Central Healthcare with the nursing home and others that have generated that calculation. We hope for a lot of reasons that while we will try to maximize it, we don't want to, it would be nice if that was lower because it would show we've got a healthier bottom line as a county. But again, we haven't grown at 5.2% in revenue for quite some time. So there's enough room in there to allow us to capture some of those funds.
And part of the 8.3 million or a little over 8 million that's been calculated as far as lost revenue for 1 year, everybody needs to understand that a significant portion of that is emanating from NCHC, North Central Healthcare. And the reason, unfortunately, is because directly related to the pandemic. And that is, if we have staff that are out because of COVID, close contacts, whatever you may have, we still have to continue to provide services for nursing home patients. So we have to go out and hire contracted staff. We potentially have to pay overtime And so I caution everyone on understanding that a significant portion of that 8 million is coming from the operations of our nursing home and some of the programs that had to be shut down at North Central Healthcare because of the pandemic. Supervisor Lamont is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would religious institutions be eligible, or would that be a doubling up of duplicate things they could apply for? They'd be in the nonprofit situation, but they've had lost revenue as well.
I guess the one thing I would reiterate is that the nonprofits, there's only certain nonprofits that are specifically spelled out in state statutes that would qualify. So not necessarily all nonprofits would qualify. And so they have to meet the state's requirement as far as statutes to be able to qualify for potential projects.
And again, it's that double standard. It's the federal regulations and the state statutes. And if the state statutes don't allow us to do it, we can't do it in spite of what the regulations may say.
So even though ARPA says any nonprofits potentially, state statutes are more restrictive, and those would be the ones that we would have to still abide by. Other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One other thought that I just had was, in my experience on ERC, we had an opportunity to do essentially internal grant applications in the past through the EIF funds. And one thing that the committee, and I'm sure others who have participated during the EIF process would attest to this, that we really benefited from was scoring. Being able to look at projects and being able to see where they ranked compared to others. And I think that if you look at this process and what it could mean for the next, 3 to 4 years, I suppose it would be really 2 years because it's December 31st, 2024, but regardless, is there a way that you could incorporate some sort of scoring element to this? Because the other point I have is that if there's going to be multiple rounds of this and to use up $26 million, chances are you might have departments applying more than once and probably for different projects as well.
We can take a look at that. We originally talked about whether or not, again, there would be buckets, X amount for public health and economic impact, and we decided against that, and then those projects would compete against themselves because we didn't know what the demand would be and how we will respond. But I think we can take a look at whether or not we can give some value to those criteria. It's going to be difficult in some cases to compare projects in different areas, but we can as a committee take a look and report back to you on how we would suggest those be applied. Ultimately, this body is the arbitrator, and this body will need to have 2/3 of its members vote for a project. So there's the ultimate control because these are all budget transfers. So if there's a project that's marginal with its support, you're not going to fund it at 51% of the board. It needs 2/3 of the board.
Other questions by other board members? Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this premium pay for help, is that retroactive to a certain date? And how far into the future does that go? To 2026 or 2024?
We haven't looked at that very closely because, quite honestly, we haven't considered it for our employees. We thought that we didn't lay anybody off as a result of the pandemic. My understanding is that it's for people that came into work during the pandemic. I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is. We can check on that. I see Supervisor Langenhahn is.
Supervisor Langenhahn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm unsure if anything changed with the final rule, but I do know that under the interim final rule, it was from the start of the pandemic, which the Treasury defined as January 27, 2020, going to the end of the public health emergency, I believe, which essentially brings it through, today forward possibly. So, like I said, I don't know if anything changed under the final rule, but that's the way it was with the interim.
But
Okay,
understand
okay.
at this point, Supervisor Chris, we have not considered any project that would provide premium pay anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair. Under number 3, services to disproportionately impacted communities, on number 3.16, it says social determinants of health, community violence interventions. So if I'm understanding that correctly, then it would be possible for, say, the women's community or a group of clinical psychologists or the sheriff's department to apply for grants under that. Or a nonprofit, whatever. So a multitude of different entities can apply for this.
The one thing I will say in regards to that is that when you get to specific projects and specific projects under certain criteria, the one thing that NACO has led the discussion on is there has to be linkage, and the linkage has to be that there's linkage directly to the impact that COVID has had on that project that is being asked to be funded. So you're correct, Supervisor Krause, but again, the critical issue is there linkage to that impact from COVID? So it's not just what it's saying here, it's saying there's also the point being that it has to be linked to COVID related.
And proportionate to the population served.
Correct. Supervisor Krause.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that domestic violence has increased by over 50% as a result of COVID. I didn't know if anyone is aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Supervisor Robinson, for that presentation. And we will move on to consent agenda items C8 through items C12B. What is your pleasure? Supervisor Christensen with the motion and Supervisor Dickinson with the second. And
Actually, Supervisor, Mr. Chair, I wanted to pull item C11C, Board of Health.
All right, C11C has been asked to be pulled individually. Is there a second then to items C8 through items C12B, excluding item C11C? Supervisor Butke with the second. Any discussion on those agenda items on the consent agenda? Again, items C8 through items C12B. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve items C8 through items C12B, excluding items 11C, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Now, items C12, C11C. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson. Is there a second? Supervisor Fisher with the second. Any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just my thoughts, keep them pretty simple. It has been my impression that the Health Board is not asking critical questions about the COVID pandemic. So two of the individuals who are on here to be reappointed, I don't really think there's oversight of the Health Department. I think it's more about just going along with the protocols and being, in essence, just comply and just say yes. For the other individual, Dr., I don't know if her name is Luce or Lucy, she's at UWSP. UWSP has mandatory masking of their students, and they require mandatory testing of unvaccinated students. I don't think this is someone who would do any kind of critical thinking on the health board to look at different policies and different ways out of the pandemic. And so for those reasons, I will be voting no to all three of these individuals. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approval of the appointments to the Board of Health signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No. No.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to items D13, Life and Public Service of James Seafelt. And I would ask the clerk to read the memorial, please.
James Spike Seafelt passed away on Saturday, November 27, 2021. He was born on January 29, 1937, to August and Arita Seafelt. Jim graduated from Wausau High School and then attended Carroll College. As a young man, he was active in the Boy Scouts and earned his Eagle Scout honor. During his high school and college years, his record-breaking hurdle running earned him his nickname Spike. In 1957, Jim married Carol Meyer, and they had 3 children, Elizabeth Ann, Jeffrey Charles, and Jay Matthew. Jim's love of the outdoors, hunting and fishing was evident in his public service. He was elected to the Marathon County Board in 1998 and served the residents of District 2 for 20 years. He served on the Land Conservation and Zoning Committee, chairing that committee for several years, Environmental Resources Committee as vice chair, and served as the vice chair of the Solid Waste Committee. In addition to serving on the county board, Jim started an insurance company, served as a youth baseball umpire, Cub Master, United Way chairman, and a member of the Wausau Noon Optimist Club. Jim enjoyed music and loved to entertain a crowd by singing and playing his guitar. He even traveled with various bands over the years, specializing in classic country songs. Surviving Jim is Lynn Murette, his partner of 20 years, his 3 children, several grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and other family and friends. In the passing of James Spike Seafelt, we have lost a leader who was dedicated to serving his community in numerous ways. He is hereby honored and remembered for his faithful public service. Now therefore be it resolved by the Marathon County Board of Supervisors that they enter this memorial into the proceedings of the board out of respect for the memory of James Spike Seafelt. A copy of this memorial shall be sent to his family with the sympathies of the board.
You've heard the memorial. What is your pleasure? Supervisor Longenon with a motion and Vice Chair McEwen with a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the memorial for James Seafelt signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carried. We will stand in observance of out of respect for Mr. Seafelt. Thank you. We'll move on to item D14, Life and Public Service of Maynard Tremeling.
Maynard Tremeling, 78, of Spencer, passed away on Thursday, December 16, 2021, at Marshfield Medical Center. Maynard was born September 6, 1943, in Neilsville to Albert and Beulah Tremeling. During his years at Spencer High School, he earned many accolades for his baseball pitching. After high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and was stationed in Germany until his honorable discharge as a Sergeant E5 in 1967. In 1968, Maynard married Sandra Rapp, and they raised a son and daughter. Sandra survives along with Kevin and Kathy Tremeling, Carrie and Scott Clues, and 4 grandchildren, Kendra, Kyle, Macy, and Delaney. Maynard is also survived by 4 siblings along with many other relatives and friends. Maynard worked for both Artcraft and Trailblazer Modular Homes in Spencer, and also hauled milk for Edelweiss Cheese Factory. In addition, he owned and operated his own dairy farm in the town of Spencer, along with the Whitetail Inn, a popular tavern. Maynard served his community in many ways. He was a member of Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Marshfield. He served the town of Spencer as chairman for over 30 years and was both commander and adjutant for the Spencer American Legion Post 298. He was a member of the Marshfield Elks Lodge 665, past president of the Art Club, past president of Marshfield MACCI, and past president of the Spencer Sportsman Club. In his free time, Maynard enjoyed watching his grandkids' sporting events, playing softball, and chasing down raffle drawings just in case he might win something. Maynard was elected to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors in 2012, representing District 28. During his 4 terms on the board, he served on the Health and Human Services, Extension, and Education and Solid Waste Management Committees. In the passing of Maynard Tremeling, we have lost a leader who was dedicated to serving his community in numerous ways. He is hereby honored and remembered for his faithful public service. Now therefore be it resolved by the Marathon County Board of Supervisors that they enter this memorial into the proceedings of the board out of respect for the memory of Maynard Tremeling. A copy of this memorial shall be sent to his family with the sympathies of the board.
You've heard the memorial. What is your pleasure? Supervisor Butke with the motion and Supervisor Robinson with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the memorial signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. The motion carries unanimously. Out of respect for Maynard Tremeling, we will have a moment of silence. Thank you. We will move on to item E15, North Central Community Services Program Board appointments.
Reappointing Deb Hager of Stratford, Chad Billub of Wausau, and Randy Balk of Wausau to the North Central Community Services Program Board for a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2024.
What is your pleasure? Supervisor Robinson with the motion and Supervisor Christensen with the second. Any discussion on those appointments? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approval of those appointments to the North Central Community Services Program Board signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, say no. And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We will move on to item E16, Environmental Resources Committee, the FSA representative.
Appointing Rodney Roscoff of 4 Mile Road, Edgar, as the Farm Service Agency representative to the Environmental Resources Committee, replacing Eric Vogel for a 2-year term to expire December 31st, 2023.
What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Longenhan and seconded by Supervisor Conway. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the appointment to the Environmental Resources Committee, the FSA representative, those signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to item F17, an ordinance amending the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County, Chapter 11.02, the Animal Waste Management Ordinance Code, Ordinance 03-22. What is your pleasure? Supervisor Conway with the motion and Supervisor Fisher with the second. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Longenhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep this very brief. Just wanted to thank the members of the ERC as well as members of the CPZ staff for working on this for the past couple months. It came out of the committee unanimous, as I'm sure you've all heard, and I'd urge you all to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the ordinance amending the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County in Chapter 11.02, the Animal Waste Management Ordinance, Code Ordinance 0-3-22, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion is carried but is not unanimous. Thank you. And we will move on to resolutions. Under County Board of Supervisors, G, 18, change in supervisory district boundaries resulting from City of Wausau annexations, Resolution 01-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Butke, second by Supervisor Rosenberg. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the change in supervisory district boundaries resulting from the City of Wausau's annexation, Resolution 01-22, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. Item H19, approve the 2021 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 02-22. This does require two-thirds majority vote. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McHugh and second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote with the approval of the 2021 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 02-22. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say
Aye.
no. Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. And we will move on to H20, approval of the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 03-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Fisher and seconded by Supervisor Christensen. Any discussion? Again, this does require a two-thirds majority vote. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the motion to approve the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 03-22. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Moving on to item H22, restructuring of the zoning and regulatory program staffing of Conservation Planning and Zoning, CPZ Department, Resolution 04-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Fisher and seconded by Supervisor Guild. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Langenhan.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, we're on H21 or
Excuse me, H21.
Okay,
correct,
thank you.
H21. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the restructuring of the zoning and regulatory program staffing of Conservation Planning and Zoning, CPZ Department, Resolution 04-22. All those in favor of that motion to approve signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Moving on to H22 now, authorizing ARPA expenditure for PTO balance liability reduction. Resolution 05-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson and second by Supervisor Fisher. Any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to be clear, I think this was mentioned last week. This is paying people for their PTO, correct?
I would
Correct.
discuss with the administrator. Go ahead.
Correct.
And the $450,000 is coming from ARPA funds, correct?
That is correct.
There was an email, and the administrator gave us an email detailing a little bit about PTO and kind of where that stands. So it seems like what we're doing here is we're taking away people's PTO and we're paying them for it because we don't want to stress out certain departments with PTO kind of falling on top of each other. It's just a way out, it seems to be, correct?
I would ask that the chair of HR Finance address the question.
The issue before us is really buying down the county's liability. Because of the pandemic, stay-at-home orders, limitations on travel, demands. We were just talking to Christy Palmer about the demands on the Finance Department with the CARES Act and other reporting and other things that took place as a result of the pandemic and all the grants that came in. And they were unable to take vacation, or we had problems in health department, social services. There were additional pressures. So we began, as people didn't take the PTO, we allowed them to accumulate it. So we've got this unfunded liability. We can question the policy, but the policy was put in place through action on the federal and state level. But the county's got this unfunded liability. And this is probably a very appropriate use of the ARPA dollars because it is a pandemic-driven increase in accumulated paid time off. And there's people will have to use it. And the concern is if everybody used it at once, we would have to pay overtime to replace many of those critical workers. So again, we're trying to address county liability for accrued paid time off using the ARPA funds. And it'll be discretionary to the employees. But this is, from a management perspective, a sound decision.
And the administrator would like to address the part of the question also.
The last thing Chair Robinson referenced covered it. I just wanted to address your point about buying down. It's a voluntary option to staff. They certainly are not mandated to utilize it. It's an option should they wish to participate in the proposed program that the county then would purchase either 40 or 80 hours. But it's certainly not mandated. If they choose to exercise their right to the PTO they've earned, they are more than welcome to do that.
Thank you. I just have another point, if I could. So right now, if someone is close contact quarantined and they're asymptomatic, the county sends them home, and they have to use their PTO. Is that correct?
Correct. If they have the ability to telework, to work remotely, we wouldn't mandate that they use PTO because they're still able to work. But if their job was such that they had to be, they were unable to be in the workplace, they would be required to utilize their PTO. Or, yes, their PTO, sorry.
Okay, so this is my last thing here. I'm going to vote no for this. One reason, really the main reason is we don't have an ARPA plan, but yet we're continually kind of shelling these out. We did 630,000, this is 450. There's a couple others on the docket that I also will vote no for because we don't have a general plan of where we're going to spend this money. And it would be my concern that without having that general kind of plan of how the money should be spent, we're just kind of winging it. Maybe it's a good reason. I certainly support the reasoning behind it, but not the way we're using the ARPA funds. I would also make one point, and that is this close contact quarantining of asymptomatic individuals. The data shows that these people simply do not return symptomatic positive. And I would really look at the administration to start revamping the policy to stop sending people home under those situations. So there's that comment, and there's the comment about the ARPA, so thank you.
Supervisor Bizzotto is next.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take the opportunity. I know there's been some concerns raised from community members about this, and I just wanted to voice my support for this measure because, as it's been noted, this is coming from ARPA funding, and I'm mindful of other advisements that we don't have a general ARPA plan. But at the end of the day, this money has to come from somewhere at this point, either, as the administrator has noted, from overtime pay for other employees or out of this fund. I just want to say, in this hot labor market, we want to be allocating funds to workers. We want these dollars to be spent in the local economy. And that's just what this will do. This will take ARPA funds that have already been allocated for things like this and put it in the pockets of workers who didn't take time off to better provide services for our county. So I think this is a top priority for what ARPA funds should go towards, and I wholly support it. Thank you.
Any other? Okay, first we have Supervisor Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question for the administrator, so I understand this. When it indicates that the PTO limits were temporarily increased, can you explain the background again on that? Who were they increased by? Was it us? Was it through federal, state mandates? I just need a little more background on that.
Sure. The limits were increased through administration. By virtue of your rules, you vest administration and employee resources with the authority to make changes to policies related to general employment. So I'll give you a couple of examples of when we did that throughout the pandemic. And I referenced this in the email that I sent to the county board. There were actions taken at the federal level. The best example is the one that I gave in the email. The Family First Coronavirus Response Act required employers that were covered, and we were a covered employer, to implement a number of things, one of which was to supplement already existing leave policies. So we made those changes, and in fact, throughout the pandemic, we probably altered our pandemic employment policies at least a dozen times. As guidance changed from the CDC, we made changes. As the rules from the state of Wisconsin, beginning with the governor's executive order to essentially stay at home, there were orders that impacted how we did business. We made changes to our employment policies to track those. So in light of the fact that individuals were, one, prohibited from traveling and unable to take vacation, and just general other factors throughout the pandemic that limited their ability to travel, to utilize vacation, we did temporarily increase those limits. And we have limits, and they're online, but we have limits based on how long you're an employee. You accumulate leave at a different rate, which is a fairly common practice. All levels of leave for all categories of employees were temporarily increased. Those leave limitations, or those leave caps, balance caps, are set to return to pre-pandemic levels by virtue of our policy on May 1st. So that's why I'm bringing this to you now, essentially to give staff enough time to, if the determination is to not approve a policy whereby they could decrease their balances through the participation in this program, staff are going to start to take leave. I hope that answers your question. It was a long-winded one.
Supervisor Longenhauen is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to request abstention.
Extension is granted. Any other discussion?
Oh, it just came on.
Any other discussion?
Hold on a second, I'm gonna vote.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Zhang, go ahead.
can I request a roll call vote, please?
You can. Roll call vote.
Thank you.
Roll call vote has been requested. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Guild. Aye. Gums.
No.
Harris. Supervisor Harris? Jacobson? Johnson?
Aye.
Krause? Lamont?
Aye.
Leahy?
Aye.
Lowe?
Aye.
Mask? McEwen?
Aye.
Oberbeck? Opal?
Aye.
Robinson? Rosenberg? Seafelt? Is excused. Soibert?
Aye.
Van Cray?
Aye.
Vol? Zhang?
Aye.
Arstead? Beestrom? Bizotto? Boots?
Aye.
Book? Supervisor Book? She mouthed aye on the camera.
Aye.
Whitkey? Aye. Christensen? Aye. Seiler?
Aye.
Conway? Aye. Dickinson?
No.
Drabeck?
Aye.
Byfrick?
Aye.
Fisher?
Aye.
Gaber?
Aye.
Gibbs?
Aye.
Gonnering? Supervisor Gonnering, can you repeat that, please?
Aye.
Thank you. Gums? I'm sorry, Harris? Mask? Supervisors Harris and Mask, I cannot hear you. If you want to send me an email with your vote, I can record it appropriately. Thank you.
And the motion is carried even without the two individuals that are on that we have not received their vote is 29-3, and the motion is carried. And so we will move on to Public Safety Committee. Item I-23, establishing an intergovernmental agreement with municipalities for assessment of addressing. Resolution 06-22. What is your pleasure? Vice Chair McEwen with a motion. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Butke. Any discussion?
Supervisor Pfeiffer.
Supervisor Pfeiffer, go ahead.
First, I want to thank you, Chair, and Mr. Mack for the response on the question from Thursday. From a safety perspective, it makes the most sense to have one general clearinghouse for setting addresses in the county. I think it does raise an interesting policy question in terms of user fees versus what a person's property taxes go to. Whether it's a town, village, or city, these fees are just going to get added on to the builder, which is making building even more expensive in a market that we're seeing surging in price this year. So I thank you for that research, though.
You are welcome. Any other discussion? Do we have a motion yet? Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approval of the establishing an intergovernmental agreement with municipalities for assessment of addressing, or assignment of addressing, Resolution 06-22, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no.
Aye.
Aye.
Can I have clarification? The last two that said aye, one was Supervisor Lamont, and I'm not sure who the other was. Were you in favor of the passage or against?
Lamont in favor.
Okay. All right, the motion is carried. Thank you. And we will move on. From the Executive Committee, item J, 24, authorizing the participation in the Uniquely Wisconsin Tourism Campaign and amending the budget, 22 budget, resolution 07-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson, and seconded by Supervisor Fisher. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
My only concerns with the plan is that there's not much of a plan. There's no detailed description, run times, placement schedules, anything like that. It's just a very broad $60,000. We're going to put it here, and we get these ads, and we can kind of use parts of them, but not other parts of them. So being someone who's been in multiple marketing areas, I would look for a little bit more. That's not why I'm going to vote no to it. I'm going to vote no to it because of the ARPA comment that I made before, that we, again, don't have a detailed plan of how to spend these funds. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Supervisor Krause.
I just have a question. With the pandemic going on now with Omicron and the hospitals being overwhelmed, people being turned away because there's not enough space in the hospitals. They've already put beds in the hallway and offices in the hallways and so on in Wausau. I am just wondering, the purpose of having more tourism and spending money on tourism and people congregating. I am assuming if they go camping, that's fine. That's somewhat of an isolation. I'd like to hear someone give a little bit more information on this. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson.
I think Administrator Leonard brought this to us, and it was in response to an effort by Wisconsin Counties Association to promote unique things in each county to get them back on track. It's aimed at the hospitality tourism industry, which was hardest hit in the pandemic. And this is a advertising campaign that will take place over a period of months, a couple of years. The number of counties led by Sheboygan County and others are taking the lead in trying to develop and highlight unique things in each county. I would hope that we would look at our outdoor recreational opportunities and other things in an effort to try to lure and attract people here. The pandemic won't last forever. This marketing campaign is aimed at trying to capture some of those people that are traveling, that want to enjoy our community, and I think that there's tremendous benefit. Efforts have been underway to work with the Visitors Convention Bureau to get them to cost share in this effort and to share in it, and I'm hopeful that it will help bring that industry back.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, this does require a 2/3 majority vote. All those in favor of authorizing the participation in the Uniquely Wisconsin Tourism Campaign and amending the 2022 budget resolution R-07-22 signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
And the motion is passed. And we will move on to item number J, 25, authorizing the administrator to negotiate a lease of space within the Community Partners Campus, Resolution 08-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson, the second by Supervisor Rosenberg. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed to vote. All those in favor of authorizing the administrator to negotiate lease of space within the community partner campus, Resolution 08-22, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. And the motion is carried and is not unanimous. And just to provide clarity, the two individuals, Supervisor Harris and Supervisor Mask, did text the clerk on the vote, on the requested vote as a yes. So that brings the total to 31-3. And we're down to items K, announcements and/or requests. And I have several announcements. The first, I will advise all supervisors that I will be emailing out to each of you a request to do a 5-question evaluation on the administrator. Again, on the even years, we're required to, the executive committee is required to solicit input from the full board. And so I will email out to you the 5 questions that were developed with Corp Counsel. There is a ranking that you can rank each of those questions in similar to how any employee is ranked: needs improvement, successful, highly successful, and or exceptional. So I would ask that you please take the time to fill that survey out. Also, if you want to provide any detail as to the rationale that you're utilizing to mark the appropriate, whatever appropriate score that you want to mark, please provide that additional feedback and provide that back to this committee no later than next month, the February 7th. So that we can tabulate that information for the executive committee to do the summary of the appraisal of the administrator. One other note, if you would, please mark your calendars to a change, and that is the March 17th board meeting. I have moved to March 15th due to travel. So again, it'll be a Tuesday meeting instead of a Tuesday meeting. So it'll be March 15th instead of March 17th, and it also has been changed on the county calendar. We need signatures. The clerk has asked for signatures from HR Finance, Public Safety, Executive, and the county board members. So anybody that is here in person from those committees and or the board, please stop after and sign the resolutions. Also, we have this Thursday, we will have the Western Towns Association, and that will be held at the town of Stettin, and lunch is being served at 6:30. Any other announcements? Supervisor Robinson.
Real quickly, I just repeat something I mentioned last Thursday relative to a survey or on speed survey. We will be trying to forward to you, local elected officials and others, a link to a survey that is being done through Geo Partners under contract with the economic development authorities across the state to collect information relative to speed data that we're using to justify funding in underserved areas. So look for that. We would appreciate your help in distributing it and getting as many people as possible to participate.
Any other announcements? Supervisor Christensen, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. This goes back to page 20 in the packet there, the North Central Community Service Board. I see the date was wrong on there. I happen to see that the term expires December 31st, 2021. So probably have to add 3 years onto that, I guess.
We'll make that Scribner correction. Thank you. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? Seeing none, we are down to item number K, 27. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Longenhagen and seconded by Supervisor Dickinson to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.